One of America's most enduring icons has made choices that left even those closest to her in stunned silence. Barbra Streisand, whose fortune exceeds $400 million, has orchestrated her legacy in ways few anticipated. When details of her estate planning emerged, the whispers began. The bulk of her immense wealth would follow paths her family never expected. Her only son, Jason Gould, would inherit just a fraction of an empire built across 6 decades of unparalleled artistic achievement. But this isn't about money. This is about the weight attached to it, the responsibility of carrying forward not just assets, but the essence of one of entertainment's most perfectionist voices. The woman who fought for creative control when Hollywood scoffed at female directors. The Brooklyn girl who refused to change her nose when beauty standards demanded it. The vocalist who battled crippling stage fright while delivering performances that made the world hold its breath. If you've ever stood at a crossroads between what others wanted and what your soul demanded, you understand something of Streisand's journey. The price of her authenticity wasn't paid in dollars, it was paid in sleepless nights, in relationships strained to breaking, in a lifelong wrestle between perfectionism and peace. Her Malibu compound, a collection of buildings overlooking the Pacific, stands as both sanctuary and symbol. The carefully curated rooms, the antiques chosen with obsessive precision, the gardens planted to frame the horizon just so. They aren't just possessions. They're physical manifestations of a woman who spent a lifetime fighting to make reality match her vision. But here's where it gets complicated. The fortress that protected her from the world also sometimes kept her isolated within it. How does someone raised in near poverty come to own an estate worth over $100 million? And what ghosts from those early days still walk those immaculate halls? The answer begins in Brooklyn, 1942, where young Barbra Joan Streisand, she would later drop an A to make her name distinctive, learned her first lessons about loss. The cramped apartment on Pulaski Street carried the lingering scent of grief. Her father, Emmanuel, had died when she was just 15 months old. The funeral expenses plunged the family into financial distress that would shadow Barbra's childhood. Her mother, Diana, a school secretary with a beautiful voice she rarely used, remarried when Barbra was 7. The relationship between stepfather Louis Kind and young Barbra was strained at best, hostile at worst. Winter nights found her huddled under thin blankets, listening to the radiator's metallic complaints, dreaming of escape, not just from the cold or from Brooklyn, but from ordinariness itself. "I wanted to be somebody," she would later confess. "I wanted to be special." The words came from a place of raw hunger, not vanity, the kind that grows in the absence of being truly seen. School offered little refuge. Her striking features, the distinctive profile that would later become iconic, made her a target. Her intensity made her an outsider. But in that isolation, something remarkable happened. She discovered her voice. Not just the technical instrument that would earn her Grammys, but her artistic perspective, the ability to transform pain into something transcendent. At 16, she slept on friends' couches, working odd jobs and scrambling for auditions. The small clubs of Greenwich Village became her training ground. There, under flickering lights and through cigarette haze, she learned to command attention without asking permission. Her unconventional beauty became an asset, not a liability. Her difference became her power. And that's when everything changed. Talent manager Martin Ehrlichman saw her perform at Bonsoir in 1960. While other managers might have tried to soften her edges or push her toward conventional beauty standards, Ehrlichman recognized that Streisand's uniqueness was her greatest asset. "She was electric," he would later recall. "You couldn't look away." This partnership would span more than 6 decades, one of the longest-standing manager-client relationships in entertainment history. The breakthrough came not gradually, but in a series of earthquakes. At 19, she landed a supporting role in the Broadway musical I Can Get It For You Wholesale. Her performance as Miss Marmalstein, a comically lovelorn secretary, stopped the show night after night. The theater critics who came to see the stars left talking about Streisand. Yet even as her star rose, the private battles intensified. The perfectionism that would become her trademark wasn't just artistic ambition, it was armor. Every note had to be flawless, every scene precisely calibrated, because anything less felt like confirmation of her deepest fears, that she wasn't enough, that she didn't belong, that success was temporary and could be snatched away. The recording studio became both a sanctuary and battleground. She would often demand dozens of takes, not out of ego but out of a relentless pursuit of emotional truth. "People call it perfectionism," she once said, "but it's really just caring deeply about getting it right." This wasn't just about vocal technique, it was about honoring the material and the audience. Behind the exacting standards was a profound respect for her craft, but the same exacting standards that produced masterpieces also created tension. Studio musicians, co-stars, and directors often found themselves exhausted by her process. The mythology of difficult Barbra began to take shape, and while some of it stemmed from sexism, male directors were visionaries for the same behaviors that made her difficult, there was no denying that working with Streisand meant operating at the outer edges of excellence. These struggles intensified with her first album, the Barbra Streisand Album, 1963. Columbia Records executives were skeptical about her insistence on keeping the torch songs and theatrical pieces she loved, rather than recording more commercial material. She refused to compromise, demanding artistic control unusual for a new artist, especially a female one. The album would win her first 2 Grammy Awards and establish a pattern she would follow throughout her career. Trust your instincts, even when they run counter to industry wisdom. The recording sessions revealed another facet of her character, a photographic memory for music. She could hear a complex arrangement once and recall every nuance, every instrumental line. This gift allowed her to communicate precisely what she wanted changed, sometimes to the frustration of seasoned musicians who weren't accustomed to such specific direction from performers, particularly young women. One studio veteran reportedly grumbled, "Who does she think she is?" The answer, though none knew it yet, one of the best-selling recording artists of all time. Now, if you're wondering how someone builds a $400 million empire while battling these inner and outer conflicts, the answer lies in an unusual combination of artistic integrity and business acumen. Unlike many performers who focus solely on their craft, Streisand understood the value of ownership. Early in her career, she negotiated for rights that other artists didn't consider: publishing shares, production credits, creative control clauses. Each contract built not just her bank account but her autonomy. Her first television special, My Name is Barbra, 1965, showcased this independence. At just 23, she refused sponsor Chemstrand's request to include their synthetic fabrics in her wardrobe. When they threatened to pull funding, she stood firm, an almost unheard-of position for a young performer. The special aired on her terms and won 5 Emmy Awards. This pattern would repeat throughout her career: principles before popularity, artistic integrity before easy money. Her film career represents another dimension of this savvy. When Hollywood wasn't creating the roles she envisioned, she created them herself. Funny Girl, 1968, wasn't just her film debut, it was a declaration. Her Oscar-winning performance as Fanny Brice seemed to blur the lines between character and creator. Both were Jewish women from Brooklyn who refused to let conventional beauty standards define their worth, who used humor as both weapon and shield. The parallels between Streisand and Brice ran deeper than most realized. Both navigated entertainment industries hostile to their ethnicity and appearance. Both used their outsider status to forge unique artistic identities. And both understood that talent alone wasn't enough. You needed business savvy to translate that talent into lasting power. Her Oscar acceptance speech, famously just 2 words, "Hello, gorgeous," masked the years of doubt and determination that preceded that moment. Her ascent continued with "Hello, Dolly," 1969, and On A. Clear Day, You Can See Forever, 1970. But it was The Way We Were, 1973, that cemented her status as a leading dramatic actress. Her portrayal of Katie Morosky, politically passionate, unapologetically intelligent, defiantly Jewish in waspy environs, resonated deeply with audiences who rarely saw such women centered in romantic narratives. The film's success empowered her next major move: stepping behind the camera. When Streisand announced her intention to direct Yentl, 1983, Hollywood's reaction ranged from skepticism to derision. No major studio would finance the project with her as director. Undeterred, she secured independent financing, maintaining creative control at the cost of a reduced budget. The film, about a young woman who disguises herself as a man to pursue forbidden education, reflected Streisand's own battles against gender restrictions. When Yentl received multiple Oscar nominations but none for directing, the snub confirmed what she already knew: women in Hollywood faced barriers that talent alone couldn't overcome. Rather than retreat, she doubled down. The Prince of Tides, 1991, and The Mirror Has Two Faces, 1996, further established her directorial vision. Though critical reception varied, her meticulous attention to detail was universally acknowledged. Every frame was composed with painter's precision, the light falling just so across Nick Nolte's troubled face in Prince of Tides, the shifting color palette reflecting Rose's transformation in Mirror. This wasn't just filmmaking, it was world-building. The Malibu compound began taking shape in the 1970s, one careful acquisition at a time. The main house, with its panoramic ocean views, became just the centerpiece of a collection of properties that includes guest houses, gardens, and a barn converted into storage for her extensive art and antique collections. Every corner reflects her precise aesthetic, the intersection of comfort and beauty, history and modernity. Within those walls, treasures tell stories. The 18th-century French furniture speaks to her appreciation for craftsmanship that predates mass production. The Art Deco pieces echo her love of the period that gave us Fanny Brice. The contemporary art, including works by Picasso and Modigliani, reveals an eye trained to recognize genius across centuries. These aren't just acquisitions. They're conversations between artists across time. Her car collection tells similar stories. The vintage automobiles aren't status symbols but time capsules, each one chosen to mark a significant moment. There's the Mercedes convertible purchased after The Way We Were became a hit single. The classic Bentley acquired during the filming of A Star is Born. Each vehicle carries memories of triumphs and turning points. The temperature-controlled vault housing her gowns represents another dimension of her legacy. These aren't merely costumes but historical artifacts. The beaded Jean-Louis creation she wore to the 1969 Oscars, the transparent pantsuit that scandalized audiences in 1969's Central Park concert, the vintage Donna Karan dresses tailored specifically for her performances. Each piece represents a moment when fashion and identity merged on the public stage. But the true measure of wealth isn't in the properties or possessions, it's in the power to create change. The Streisand Foundation, established in 1986, has quietly distributed more than $25 million to causes ranging from women's health research to environmental protection, civil liberties, and nuclear disarmament. The Barbra Streisand Women's Heart Center at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center stands as testament to her understanding that wealth carries responsibility. Her advocacy for women's cardiovascular health stemmed from personal outrage. Learning that most heart disease research focused on men, despite heart disease being the leading killer of women, she leveraged her platform and resources to address this disparity. The center doesn't just bear her name, it reflects her core belief that influence should serve purpose beyond personal gain. And here's the weight behind that wealth. For every check written to support a cause, there are hours spent in meetings, researching issues, vetting organizations. For every public donation, there are private moments of witnessing suffering she cannot fix despite all her resources. The burden of having means is knowing you cannot solve everything, yet still feeling compelled to try. The formation of her estate plans reveals this same tension, between nurturing talent and enabling dependence, between generosity and wisdom. Public records and interviews suggest that while her son Jason will inherit significant assets, the majority of her fortune is designated for charitable foundations that will continue her advocacy work long after she's gone. This decision hasn't been without controversy within her circle. Those who expected traditional inheritance models expressed shock, even betrayal. But those who understand Streisand's journey recognize the consistency. She has always prioritized legacy over luxury, impact over indulgence. The fortune amassed through decades of artistic excellence will continue working toward the more just world she has consistently advocated for since the earliest days of her fame. The private cost of building such a legacy is measured not in dollars, but in moments. The birthdays missed while on location, the relationships that couldn't withstand her dedication to her craft, the strain of living under constant scrutiny, the projects abandoned because they couldn't meet her standards, the fear, never fully conquered, of performing live, which kept her from touring for nearly 3 decades. Stage fright might seem incongruous for someone of her stature, but it points to the vulnerability beneath the icon. During her 1967 concert in Central Park, a moment of forgotten lyrics spiraled into what she would later describe as psychological distress. The 27-year hiatus from live performance that followed wasn't caprice, but self-protection. When she finally returned to the stage for a 1994 concert series, Each performance represented not just artistic expression but personal triumph over nearly paralyzing anxiety. The toll extended beyond her public life. Those close to her described periods of isolation when the pressure became overwhelming, days when the perfectionism that drove her success turned inward, making even simple decisions impossible. The sprawling Malibu estate sometimes felt less like freedom and more like beautiful confinement, a gilded space where she could control every variable except her own racing thoughts. Her relationship with fame itself has been ambivalent at best. She craved recognition for her work, but recoiled from the invasive nature of celebrity. Paparazzi targeting her became the subject of California legislation after particularly aggressive pursuits endangered her safety. The woman who could command any stage found herself sometimes unable to walk through a restaurant without panic rising. What does it mean to be so successful yet so constrained by the very qualities that create that success? What price is paid when the same perfectionism that produces masterpieces also prevents you from experiencing them without criticism? These questions hover around Streisand's legacy, not as indictments but as acknowledgments of the complexity behind the accomplishments. Through these struggles, certain anchors remained. Her son, Jason, born during her marriage to actor Elliot Gould, grew up in the contradictory position of being both intensely protected and unavoidably exposed. Their relationship has weathered its challenges, including his coming out as gay in the early 1990s, which initially caught Streisand unprepared but ultimately strengthened their bond through mutual acceptance. The dissolution of her marriage to Gould in 1971 marked a painful chapter. The intensity that made her brilliant on stage created challenges in domestic life. "We were like fire and water," Gould later reflected. The divorce left her a single mother balancing an exploding career with parenting responsibilities. Though their marriage ended, they maintained a respectful connection through their shared love for their son, a grace note in Hollywood's often discordant relationship symphony. A series of high-profile relationships followed, with hairdresser and producer John Peters, with tennis champion Andre Agassi, with actor Don Johnson, each reflecting different facets of her complex nature. Some were drawn to her fierce intellect, others to her vulnerability, still others to the power she wielded in an industry where few women held real authority. These relationships, for all their intensity, couldn't quite provide the balance she sought. Her marriage to James Brolin, beginning in 1998, brought a steadiness to her personal life that had previously proven elusive. The actor, director, and producer seemed to understand both the woman and the icon, providing support without seeking to diminish her light. "I've waited my whole life to find someone like him," she once confessed. The partnership, now spanning over 25 years, stands as proof that even the most independent spirits can find companionship that enhances rather than constrains. Their Malibu home reflects this harmony, his woodworking shop alongside her antique collections, his practical approach complementing her artistic vision. Friends describe a relationship where neither diminishes to accommodate the other, where difference becomes strength rather than friction. In an industry notorious for disposable relationships, theirs endures, not without challenges, but with mutual respect as its foundation. What lessons might we draw from watching someone navigate such complexities of heart and home? Perhaps that even the most brilliant among us seek connection, that independence and partnership aren't mutually exclusive, that finding someone who respects your essence is worth the wait, however long. The question of legacy becomes increasingly prominent as Streisand enters her 9th decade. What happens to a creative empire built on such personal vision when its architect is no longer present to guide it? Who can possibly inherit not just the assets but the aesthetic sensibility, the unwavering standards, the balance of business and artistry? The Barbra Streisand Foundation will continue its work, guided by trustees she has carefully selected and principles she has meticulously documented. The archives, containing everything from costume sketches to personal correspondence, recordings of alternate takes to handwritten lyrics, will preserve her creative process for future generations. The real estate portfolio will likely be parceled among family, institutions, and charitable causes according to her detailed instructions. Her extensive musical catalog, over 60 albums spanning 6 decades, represents both artistic achievement and significant financial asset. The publishing rights alone generate substantial annual income. Her careful stewardship of these recordings, including remastering projects and limited-release archival collections, ensures they will remain available and relevant long after she can no longer oversee such efforts personally. The film projects she directed contain another dimension of her legacy. Through them, future filmmakers can study her visual language, her approach to performance, her ability to balance intimacy with spectacle. The scripts she fought to preserve rather than water down stand as testament to her belief that audiences deserve substance, not just sensation. But the true inheritance is more ethereal: the courage to remain authentic in a world that rewards conformity, the willingness to fight for creative control rather than surrendering to expediency, the understanding that perfectionism, for all its costs, can produce work that stands the test of time. In a rare reflective moment during a 2016 interview, Streisand acknowledged both the gifts and burdens of her approach. "Sometimes I wish I could relax more, enjoy the moment instead of always seeing what could be improved. But then, would I have created what I've created? Would I have pushed boundaries? I don't know." The question hangs in the air, unanswerable yet essential to understanding her journey. When we consider Streisand's impact on younger generations of performers, this complexity becomes particularly relevant. Artists as diverse as Lady Gaga, Ariana Grande, and Lea Michele cite her as fundamental influence, not just vocally but in her refusal to compromise her vision. Can they absorb her determination without inheriting her demons? Can they learn from both her triumphs and her struggles? Streisand's current chapter is focused on this handover, not in resignation but in careful orchestration. Recent interviews find her reflective but not retiring, taking stock but still creating. The memoir she worked on for years, My Name is Barbra, was released in 2023 at over 1,000 pages, typical of her thoroughness and her determination to tell her own story in her own way. The process of writing those pages forced confrontations with painful memories: her father's death, her stepfather's cruelty, professional betrayals, personal disappointments. Yet it also allowed her to reclaim narratives often distorted by tabloids and biographers. The book, like everything she creates, bears her unmistakable signature: comprehensive, unflinching, occasionally sharp-edged, ultimately truthful. Her work in recent years has increasingly focused on preservation, of her catalog through remastering projects, of her visual legacy through photography books, of her advocacy through strengthened foundation structures. This isn't surrender to age but strategic planning, ensuring that what she's built will remain intact and purposeful. Recent performances, while less frequent, demonstrate that the instrument remains remarkable. The voice has lowered, taken on new colors, but the precision and emotional intelligence that always distinguished her interpretations remain intact. These appearances feel less like nostalgia and more like masterclasses, each song a distillation of decades spent honoring the marriage of music and meaning. What continues to distinguish Streisand from contemporaries who simply tour their greatest hits is her continued curiosity. Recent albums have featured collaborations with artists half her age, explorations of material she hadn't previously recorded, reinterpretations of songs associated with different phases of her career. The legendary perfectionist remains unwilling to rest on achievements, however monumental. Why does this matter to us, beyond the spectacle of wealth or the pleasure of her artistic output? Because Streisand's journey represents transformation of the highest order. The wounded child who felt unseen became a woman who commanded the world's attention on her own terms. The girl who grew up in financial insecurity built not just wealth but sustainability and purpose. The outsider who was mocked for her differences turned those very differences into her greatest strengths. In a culture that often celebrates overnight success and youth above all, Streisand offers a different narrative, one of sustained excellence, constant growth, and the courage to evolve without abandoning your core truth. Her legacy isn't just in the records sold or awards won, but in the permission she gives to generations of artists, especially women, to be complicated, demanding, visionary, and unapologetic. When we trace the line from Streisand to contemporary female artists who write, produce, and direct their own projects, who maintain ownership of their masters, who leverage their platforms for social causes, the inheritance becomes clear. Without her battles, how many doors would have remained closed? Without her example, how many talents might have compromised their vision beyond recognition? The choices she's made about her estate, the balance between family provision and philanthropic impact, reflect this same complexity. There is generosity but also discernment, personal care but also community responsibility. The full details remain private, as they should, But the outline visible through public records and occasional comments suggests a legacy plan as thoughtfully crafted as any of her performances. Consider what it means to build something meant to outlast you. Not just assets, but impact. Consider what it takes to look beyond family lines to envision how your life's work might serve strangers you'll never meet. Consider the courage required to make choices that may disappoint those closest to you because you believe in a larger purpose. Streisand has never been content with the easy path, the predictable choice, the comfortable compromise. From refusing to alter her appearance to demanding directorial control, from investing in causes before they were fashionable to structuring her estate for maximum social benefit, she has consistently chosen purpose over popularity, vision over validation. As we reflect on what Barbra Streisand has created and what she chooses to leave behind, perhaps the most fitting tribute is recognition of the wholeness of her vision, not just the parts that entertained us, but the parts that challenged us. Not just the beauty she created, but the barriers she broke in creating it. If her music ever carried you through a difficult season, if her films ever showed you strength you didn't know you had, if her example ever helped you stand a little taller in your own difference, consider leaving a small tribute below. Even a single like is a whisper of gratitude for a woman who gave voice to so many emotions we struggled to express ourselves. In the end, what Barbra Streisand leaves behind isn't just wealth that can be counted or divided. It's courage that can be borrowed when our own runs low. It's permission to reach for excellence without apology. It's proof that authenticity, however costly, remains our most precious possession.